You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 11th of July 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program, Donald Trump's latest tariff letter leaves markets wondering just how serious the U.S. administration is this time around. After that,
is not just about what the United States is doing now, but is aiming to make clear that come 2029, the world will look fundamentally different.
we speak with two former U.S. administration officials about what comes after the Trump administration. From there to technology news with Samsung's latest big product unveiling. We'll also get the latest in high jewelry for the big spenders out there. And finally,
I was thinking about travel when I think of a magazine for the summer, and I decided to pick my favorite travel magazine.
our summer series of recommendations continues this week with Fernando Augusto Pacheco. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. Another day, another letter from the Trump administration spelling out tariff rates and sending markets on a quest to figure out just how serious Donald Trump really is. Yesterday, a letter went out to Canada suggesting a 35% rate. It sent markets into a tailspin until an administration official suggested the rate would only apply to goods not covered in an existing trade deal with Canada and Mexico. Next up, the European Union, which is expecting a letter anytime in the next few days. Well, joining me now is Edith Hancock, competition reporter for The Wall Street Journal. Edith, thanks very much for coming on the show. Let's start with this letter to Canada. What did you make of it, and how set in stone do we think it really is?
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me on. To be honest, I think we're in a bit of a Schrodinger's stone situation. I think that the letters certainly show a little bit more intention and seriousness with regard to imposing tariffs versus, an outburst that we might see on Truth Social. But I think if you look at what Trump has been doing, what the administration have been doing over the last 6 months or so, even when things seem like they're set in stone, if markets, as you say, go into a tailspin, they could be very easily paused or undone. So I'm afraid that I can't give the markets any more certainty on this.
Nobody really can. And what about the suggestion from Trump as well that rates to any country could be above 10% for those countries that aren't getting letters? It could be 15, 20%. Is that also something, do we expect that? There was a reaction from markets to that one as well. But again, is that something we expect to be somewhat set in stone? How serious should we take a threat like that?
I think, even at the policy level, with the EU, for example, everybody's just taking each day as it comes at this point. I think that those letters are being regarded, again, with a higher degree of seriousness, or a higher degree of severity and a higher degree of intention than something that, again, that might just be a social media post, but it's just still not clear.
And what does that mean for negotiations if you look at, say, between the US and the European Union to move on? They are also expecting a letter to come in the next few days, but they are also negotiating. Does a letter in that sense mean that negotiations, if not ending, are entering a new phase?
Well, I think it's an interesting one because the European Commission, or, the European Union's executive arm, they are, absolutely so ready to make a political statement on whatever agreement in principle they've decided with the US. We were, as reporters in Brussels on Wednesday, I think a lot of us were just sat by our laptops waiting for something to drop, and it never did. I think that if they're getting a letter, rather than being able to sort of agree on a political statement that each side is on board with, that potentially is a sign that maybe things aren't going in a direction that they wanted. But I think it'll be much clearer when we see what's in the letter.
And how much of this, I have to ask, in Brussels, with everyone waiting there, as you say, for this letter, in the meantime, is it prompting the EU, is it prompting companies to, frankly, reorient their trade, even as they try to continue negotiating with the US?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I can speak much more from the EU side than the company side. I think that what you do see with the Commission in recent months is that they're very keen to communicate when they're talking to other trading partners about landing a deal. We get updates from them all the time about a digital trade agreement with South Korea, or chats that they're having with the United Arab Emirates. I think that, and even with China, which historically there's been a bit of beef between the EU and China over electric vehicles, you're even starting to see tentative talks happening with those two, with those two regions as well. So I think, you are seeing a little bit more of a newfound impetus to reorient trade in that sense.
And the other question I wanted to ask you about, Edith, is this issue of retaliation, because that is another sort of side of these letters. Whenever Donald Trump has sent these out, he's basically set a tariff rate, but then also said, if you retaliate, that rate will go up. How are governments responding to that? How do you expect Brussels to respond to that? Would they be worried about retaliating, or do they feel, they're going to have to retaliate in some way if Donald Trump goes ahead with a high tariff rate?
I think that what they want us to understand is that they're ready for any eventuality, and it's just so unclear in this period right now. So theoretically, on Monday at midnight, a package of retaliatory tariffs would kick in against the US from the EU side, but also they very much have the power to stop that from happening instantly, or to suspend it, or to then reimpose it. So it's just it's very much they're just waiting to hear from their counterparts in the US at this point.
I just wonder if markets sort of realize the power they have here, in the sense that if they were to respond negatively, then maybe Trump rethinks his tariffs. If they don't respond negatively, then he might go ahead with them.
Yeah. Trump does actually think about what the markets are doing. I mean, we saw with the first tariffs imposition, when everything kind of went a bit nuts, he did kind of row back a little bit. So yeah, I think maybe there is a realization that they've got a little bit more power there.
And just finally then, anything on the digital services, regulations, all of that, that's a big thing for the European Commission and the European Union as well. Are they prepared to keep that in play, as it were, to soften any kind of regulations on digital companies, as Donald Trump might want in these talks?
Well, I think that's a very dicey topic as well. The European Commission have been very, very keen to say we are not going to compromise on any of our laws. There was a draft agreement from the US side doing the rounds maybe 2 weeks ago that was requesting a little bit more oversight on the Digital Markets Act, which is basically this new law that the EU has to rein in the market power of big tech companies. But again, the Commission has been keen to communicate time and time again that is not up for negotiation. I think that one thing that they could do to respond if they wanted to, there's a legal tool called the anti-coercion instrument, and that's something that the EU can use to go after digital services in that way. But we're hearing less about that at the moment. I think that they are still keen to say that they've got all these tools at their disposal, and they are willing to use them if they need to.
Edith Hancock, we'll see what happens on Monday. Thanks very much for joining us, the competition reporter for the Wall Street Journal. And now here's Tom Webb with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Russia has intercepted 155 Ukrainian drones overnight. 2 people were killed by the attacks. Meanwhile, Russia targeted the west of Ukraine, damaging homes and a hospital. Over the past week, Moscow has pummeled Ukraine with the largest drone and missile barrages since the start of the war. PKK fighters have destroyed their weapons at a ceremony in Iraqi Kurdistan. 2 months after the Kurdish rebels ended their decades-long armed struggle against the Turkish state, the disarmament process will start under tight security and is expected to take all summer. The day marks 40 years of armed struggle, with 40,000 killed in the conflict. Satellite images have confirmed that North Korea is dismantling a crucial inter-Korean facility. The structure has already disappeared from a family reunion centre, a site once symbolic of cross-border reconciliation for families separated by the Korean War. The facility's demolition appears to have been underway since late last year, at a time where South Korea have been attempting cross-border communication. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Tom. It may be not even 6 months since Donald Trump's second term in office began, but that does not mean there aren't thinkers and policymakers who are contemplating what comes after this term ends. A new article in Foreign Affairs magazine called Absent at the Creation, American Strategy and the Delusion of a Post-Trump Restoration aims to look at exactly this. How should a future U.S. government pick up the pieces, think about American leadership and its role in the world in the aftermath of the Trump administration? Well, we're joined now by Rebecca Lissner, fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and former Deputy National Security Advisor to U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, and by Mira Rapp-Hopper, Asia Group Partner and former Special Assistant to U.S. President Joe Biden. Good to have you both on the show. And Rebecca, I wanted to start with you and kind of the premise of this article, because there are still at this moment certainly bipartisan groups, think tanks that are trying to influence the Trump administration's foreign policy approach. Why should we think about what comes after instead of appealing to the Trump administration itself?
They're not mutually exclusive. Of course, there are opportunities to shape the Trump administration's policies. But what we're arguing is that it is time now to start looking over the horizon, to start planning for the world after Trump leaves office this time. And the reason for that is that Trump has made a number of shocking policy changes. For example, the trade war, which remains in headlines even today. And in doing so, he's accelerating something that has been actually taking place for some time. He's contributing to the world becoming more multipolar, which means that power is diffusing globally away from the United States and towards other actors. Now, this isn't new. We've known this for some time. Since the global financial crisis, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, America's global role has been changing, and the American people have been asking for a different global role. And then you add in there the rise of China, rapid technological change and diffusion. So we'd already begun to enter a new era. But in his unpredictability, his erratic policies, these changes are now accelerating. And in order to plan for the world of 2029, we need a fresh approach. We need to take a zero-based approach to U.S. foreign policy to plan for the world as it will be, and also to plan for U.S. foreign policy as it should be.
Mira, to bring you in, and before we get to some of these accelerated changes under the Trump administration, what's interesting is this article is as much about what Trump is doing as it is about how other countries are responding to this administration compared to, say, the first term of Trump, where it might have been seen as more of an aberration. And, you know, after that, there was a return to traditional American foreign policy making. Is there a recognition around the world at this point, in your mind, that the U.S. is forever changed, that there is no going back like there was in that first term?
This is a really important point, Chris, and I'm so glad you brought this up. And the short answer is yes. This time is different, both for our allies around the world and adversaries who may wish to challenge the United States. Exactly as you say, the first time President Trump was elected, it was easy enough, especially for American partners, to hope that this was a one-time aberration, and indeed hope that Joe Biden's presidency marked a restoration of more traditional American leadership and American power on the global stage. But when the American people elected Donald Trump for a second time, it was all of a sudden undeniable that this was part of our fabric and that our role in the world would fundamentally change as a result. And as you've indicated here, our article and our argument is not just about what the United States is doing now, but is aiming to make clear that come 2029, the world will look fundamentally different because of U.S. actions, in part because those allies and adversaries will move around us and help to ensure that this incipient multipolarity that Rebecca just outlined does in fact come to pass. What I mean by that is that as President Trump moves forward with his trade war, we can already see challengers like China moving to fill the void and assume a leadership mantle. And in both Europe and Asia, we see allies, traditional longstanding American allies from NATO to Japan, South Korea, and Australia, thinking about how they can invest in their own defense in case the United States is less reliable. So what that means is that the fabric of the international system is actually moving around us. And the next U.S. president will face a world that looks very different than the one that we see today.
And on that topic of self-defense, Rebecca, when it comes to Europe in particular, one of the interesting aspects is that we imagine a world where Europe will be standing up more on its own 2 feet. We have just had a deal at the NATO summit for European nations or NATO nations to spend up to 5% on defense. And your suggestion in this article is that a future U.S. administration maybe only needs to enable European security rather than be the provider of it. What does that look like?
Well, let's be clear. Getting Europe to spend more on its own defense, strengthening NATO in that way through greater burden sharing has been a bipartisan priority across many decades. Now, how did Donald Trump actually shock Europe into making those changes? Well, President Trump sided with Russia over Ukraine. He cut off intelligence and weapons sales to Ukraine. He's questioned NATO, and he's aligned himself with far-right parties. So I think we need to be very clear-eyed about how we've gotten here. And of course, that comes on top of the persistent threat that Russia now poses to Europe. But if in 2029, another president comes in and finds a NATO that is more capable, but also more autonomous, it would be a mistake to aim to reverse those trends rather than attempting to build on them. And there could be an opportunity for the United States to play more of a role of security enabler rather than a role of wholesale security provider. If NATO is in fact on track to meet its 5% of defense pledge and is in fact creating new capabilities that fill gaps that previously had only been filled by the United States, then rather than aim to reverse any of those trends, the United States should take advantage of them, adjusting perhaps in a responsible way our military posture in Europe, adjusting perhaps leadership responsibilities within NATO in a way that reflects evolving realities, and also continuing to focus with Europe on the Russia threat at the same time as dedicating more U.S. resources to the Indo-Pacific, where the United States faces a peer competitor in the form of China.
And Mira, you touched on China as well, kind of taking advantage of this trade war and the fact that the Trump administration is also targeting allies in the Indo-Pacific for tariffs. I wanted to ask you about that as well, how that will shift things around. One interesting thing in your article as well is that you suggest in, say, 2029, American power, economic power shouldn't just be about economic might. It needs to be more wholesale. It needs to focus on AI, technological advancement, helping allies in that kind of area.
Absolutely. So one of the key forces that we're seeing play out right now is the equal opportunity economic nationalism that has really been the driving force behind the Trump administration's tariff policy. One of the biggest shocks to Asia on April 2nd, Liberation Day, was that not only did the Trump administration levy exceedingly high tariffs against China, but brought extremely high duties against partners like South Korea, Japan, and Vietnam as well, much higher than any of them were expecting. And that seemed to send the signal that this was an equal opportunity assault on the global trading order as we know it, in which longtime allies would not be privileged. And since then, we've seen all of those partners scramble to cut deals with the Trump administration. And frankly, it's just really not clear how that's going. But the point that you raised, Chris, is broader than this. And that is the fact that while American alliances and partnerships were often founded on the premise of mutual defense and creating security commitments, which remain extremely important today, to make those partnerships really fit to the 21st century, we need to fold in economic cooperation and make sure those alliances are fit to purpose to be able to compete in areas of critical technology. Now, this was work that the Biden administration started and had some very ambitious early moves on, including when it came to the way that we conduct semiconductor policy around the world through close partnerships with Japan, South Korea, and the Netherlands to try to regulate chip production. But as AI competition moves into the fore of the U.S.-China dynamic, it's going to be essential that cooperation on artificial intelligence also becomes part of our alliance structure. So as we think about how we might renegotiate these long-standing bargains with our allies in Europe and Asia, placing economic as well as technological issues front and center will help us to modernize them, as well as to make more responsible decisions about finite American resources.
Rebecca, listener of the Counts on Foreign Relations and Mira Rapphopper, Asia Group partner. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thanks very much for joining us on The Briefing. This is The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak, and it's time now for a roundup of technology news with a singular focus on Samsung, which this week has unveiled its newest product lineup in a special event in Brooklyn. And among those attending the Brooklyn unveiling was David Phelan, Monocle's tech correspondent, who joins me now in the studio, fresh off a plane from New York. David, I don't know how you do it.
Well, I think it'll hit me later, but I feel fine so far.
You feel fine so far. We're going to find out in this whole segment just how fine you feel, David. Okay. Tell me first of all about this event with Samsung. I'm curious, kind of, does it rival Apple at this point for kind of the fanfare that comes with these announcements?
Yes, I think this was their biggest event, and they've always had quite a bit of fanfare. But yes, they took over 2 enormous buildings in Brooklyn and decked them out for keynotes and a party and briefings and interviews, and also announcing some key new products. In the autumn is when they tend to announce their folding phones, and the Galaxy Z Fold 7 is their latest folding phone, and absolutely their thinnest. I'm going to give it to you, Chris, and when it's
already have it, and you always bring your gadgets.
It's when it's open, it's 4.2 millimeters thick. So it feels amazingly thin. Even when it's folded, it doesn't feel much thicker than a regular phone. So there's a camera bump on the back, but otherwise it's amazingly thin. But it still feels durable, and there's the crease down the join where the fold is, but it's much less noticeable than on earlier models.
Yeah, it's not very noticeable, and it does give you that really nice amount of space to actually use the phone. It almost feels like a tablet, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So it means that if you can use it like a phone, but then you want to show someone a photo or you want to look at a map, you open it up and it optimizes the software so that it looks good when it's unfolded.
And I understand this was like the 7th iteration. Why did it take until 7 to have such a difference?
I think, well, that's an interesting thing. That is now about as half the thickness of the very first one, the Galaxy Fold, which came out 7 years ago. But actually, Galaxy Fold 6 was quite a lot thicker than this. The difference in thickness has really come about in the last year when they've absolutely thinned down every component to make it thinner.
Now, you do have some other gadgets as well, but before we get to that, I know you also spoke with Samsung's new chief design officer about kind of what they're looking at, what they're thinking of implementing. How did that go?
Yeah, that was great. Mauro Puccini, I beg your pardon, who has just joined. He used to be the chief design officer at PepsiCo, before that at 3M. So he's very familiar with that job description. I think he's brought it to Samsung with an overarching view of how Samsung should design its products. He's got a 10-year plan for the portfolio, how it will change. And the key to that seems to be AI, which will be introduced in everything from phones to tablets to home appliances to TVs. He even let slip that they're working on eyewear, which hasn't been announced before.
It is interesting to go from something like PepsiCo to Samsung, isn't it? What kind of eye does he bring?
Well, yes, I asked him that, and he said that you have to take a step back, that whichever company it is, it's all about what you can do for people, how you can bring happiness and joy to consumers.
And when it comes to the AI stuff, what's your sense of like what that means for the phone market? What's going to be coming in the pipeline?
I think it's just going to be everywhere, so that everything you do on the phone, you won't know, they won't announce all the time this is using AI, but it will be, because it makes it much more personalised. That personalisation is going to be a big thing. And he also talked about the multimodality, that is so that you can interact not just by touch, but by voice and by vision as well.
Now, finally, David, you brought one more gadget. We have the flips and the folds, as it were. So now we have the flip.
This is the Flip 7.
Also 7.
Yes, though confusingly only the 6th generation. They jumped a number at one point. It's not as thin, but it's great if you just want a regular-sized phone, and then it folds in half to pop into your pocket. And if you look at the screen with the cameras on the front, when it comes on, when it's folded, the entire surface is now a screen with just two cameras and a flash peeping out of it, which Samsung hasn't done before. And it means that, for example, if I'm taking your photograph with those cameras, you can see yourself on the other screen, so that you can't complain afterwards that I haven't taken a good picture. You've been involved in that.
That's very nice. Appreciate being involved at all times. How is just finally this sort of market for folds and flips going? Is this something that Samsung expects to really take off? Are they popular?
Yes, they are still a very small part of the market, not least because they're expensive. The Fold 7 is £1,800, $2,000, so it's more expensive than a regular phone for obvious reasons. But I think Samsung, I was talking to another executive, and he felt that this year they believed was going to be the year that it became much more mainstream option.
Well, they're certainly trying with their big events in Brooklyn. David Phelan, Monocle's tech correspondent, thank you very much for joining us. We'll let you get some rest. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing. And now, if after that tech roundup from David Phelan, you still have a bit of spare cash lying around, then this segment is for you, because it's time now for an update of news from the world of high jewellery, which has been making a splash during Paris's Haute Couture week. And joining us for that is Brenda Toohey, Monocle's luxury markets editor, right here in the studio. Good afternoon, Brenda.
Hi, Chris. Nice to be here.
It's good to have you here. How is the high jewellery market doing?
Pretty buoyant. I mean, it is the stuff of dreams. It's really an art form.
It is an art form, isn't it? And tell us what exactly this means. What is high jewellery? It's the creme de la creme.
It is the creme de la creme. It's the very top of a house's jewellery production. The pieces are one-offs, incredible one-offs, the things of dreams. So they have searched for perfectly matching gemstones, spherical pieces of jade, sparkling, flawless diamonds. I looked at a pair of diamond earrings at Boucherer. It was my first appointment in Paris. They were exquisite. They were 8-carat emerald-cut diamonds on the bottom, held up by a 3-carat diamond on the top. Very little metal. The metal was platinum. And I just said, what would these retail for? 2.6 million euro.
A cool 2.6 million euro. And again, to highlight this, these are one-offs that we're talking about. So you get a chance to see these, but before they're picked off the shelves, it's not really retail. It's it's a one-time price.
It is a one-time price. And it's a very special viewing going to High Jewels in Paris, because they invite the press. So the big houses invite the press, but they also invite their private clients.
At the same time. So you don't know if you'll actually get to see any of the jewelry.
Yeah, maybe not. On Monday, you can probably, if your appointment's on Monday, you can probably see most things that the houses have on offer. But by Monday evening, there may have been a dinner where a lot of the beautiful pieces were sold. So on Tuesday, when you come in, there may be jewelry stands with missing pieces, which is sad that you never got to see it. But it is wonderful that now other people will see it privately, of course, on the new owner.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Where does one go once it leaves Paris Haute Couture? Or if you weren't able to see some of these pieces, what happens to high jewelry after this?
Well, if you weren't able to see the pieces, by private appointment in Paris, you can, of course, see wonderful pieces that may come back into the secondary market at auction houses. The PAD exhibitions that are throughout the world, in Paris and London, in New York, they always have dynamite jewelry. And then there are special jewelry dealers, really top-notch. There's the Louisa Guinness Gallery in London. There's Elisabetta Cipriani, who sometimes commissions artists to create work for her, like Ai Weiwei, for example. So that's pretty top-notch special stuff. There's Wartski, if you're interested in the antique high jewel market.
Thank you for all those options. I don't know if my Monocle salary quite leads me to go there right now, but I did want to ask you one other thing while we have you, Brenda, because talking about how well the sort of high jewelry, high-end fashion market is doing, there was an auction of the Hermes Birkin bag, record auction. That's a sign that, these things are being snapped up, isn't it?
I snuck into Sotheby's on Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. and saw the actual original Jane Birkin bag. It was very, very well worn. It was hardly even, black anymore. The corners were gone. It was a little soft, but it was magical. I mean, I talked to one of the specialists who thought that they might get 2 million, but they actually got 7.4 million pounds, including the commission. And this bag had been sold before to a Parisian boutique owner who just put it back into Sotheby's. So just incredible stuff. It shows you just the power of Hermes and the power of provenance, like Jane Birkin.
A cool 7.4 million pounds. Brenda Toohey, Monocle's luxury markets editor. Thank you very much for joining us on The Briefing. And finally, on today's show, it is time for our weekly summer series where we tap Monocle's editors and leading contributors to regale us with their summer recommendations, from seasonal dishes and engrossing beach reads to magical vacation spots and elevated fashion tips. For our 5th edition, Monocle's Anita Riota spoke with Monocle's senior correspondent, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Now, nailing down our resident sunny Brazilian on just one category did prove impossible, so for this week's edition, Fernando has curated his own selection of summer favorites, and Anita started by asking him what the soundtrack of our summers should be.
Not the easiest question, but I have one for you. And in fact, we have a clip, and I think, Anita, you will understand why I've picked this. It's so easygoing. It is Charlotte Cardin with Feel Good.
You make me feel good. Sur ma taille, ensemble dans le taxi, c'est vraiment super sexy. You make me feel nice.
And you know why I like it so much? Because there's a story to it. I mean, it is a very light-hearted song. I interviewed actually Charlotte Cardin in Paris, and we were talking about it because she released this song in 2023. And she said, you know what? The radios were not playing it. People were not connecting that much to the song. So she kind of re-recorded the track, but still nothing. And suddenly in 2025, it's everywhere. Social media in the top 10 of the music parade in France is still there, actually. So it's quite a crazy story, and I think people are finally connecting to it.
I mean, and it got all 3 people, you, me, and Lily, our studio manager, immediately dancing. So I would say we connected with it immediately. Fernando, you are also the host of our print media program, The Stack. So for this summer, what other publications beside Monocle and Confect are you tucking into your carry-on?
I was thinking about travel when I think of a magazine for the summer, and I decided to pick my favorite travel magazine. It is from Japan, of course. As you know, I love the magazines from Japan. I think Transit is beautiful. It's a quarterly publication based in Tokyo, and in every issue they go to a different country, region. I mean, for example, one of their issues was like bread from around the world. So it's not your typical like best hotels to stay somewhere. They really go in depth to a country. So the current issue is Mongolia, which is a country that I'm dying to visit. So of course I've ordered my copy already. And they really go in depth. And I tell you this because I bought one of their old issues about Brazil. My God, they knew stuff that even I didn't know about Brazil.
Amazing.
They were like, these are the TV hosts you should know in Brazil. This is the animals where you can find in every single Brazilian state. So it's a level of precision that it's fantastic. You don't need to speak Japanese. Use your Google Translate or whatever, you know. It's a beautiful print title that I would recommend.
So we have gone dancing. We've packed amazing reads for our travels. But, every once in a while, if we want to take a beat and relax, what movie are you throwing on the TV?
Well, I don't think I'm going to say anything. I'll just play a clip and everybody will understand what I mean.
It's a beautiful day, and people are having a wonderful time. You yell shark, we've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July.
Goosebumps there.
Truly.
That was Jaws, of course, by Steven Spielberg. And the reason why I chose Jaws, I think it's one of the best films of all time. And it's celebrating 50 years. And in fact, if you are interested, I believe in some cities around the world in August, we'll be able to watch Jaws on IMAX. So of course I'm doing that. I love a good film with sharks in it. Nothing beats Shark, but there are others as well. They're 47 meters down. I think there's a 48 meters down as well, which was the sequel. Anyway, I love films with sharks, but Jaws is just an all-time classic.
So we've now just watched Jaws. If we're not too spooked to get into the water now and we're just lounging on the beach, what book do you have in your bag to read on the beach?
I have one of a guy that I'm been a fan, for years, which is Michel Goubert. He is a sound designer for fashion brands. So basically, he picks the music from Chanel, so I'm sure you've heard his music, from Fendi and Willy Chavaria, so new designers as well. So he's a brilliant kind of musical mastermind, and he released a memoir called Remixed, and he talks about meeting Karl Lagerfeld, which kind of was heavily influential in his career as well. So I love that because fashion is much more than just clothes, It is a little bit also about music, the music you pick for the catwalk, which is so, so important. He's a bit of a fashion legend. I think it's a good read. He had a fun life. I mean, he's still having a fun life.
So, for our final item, I couldn't help myself. I have in front of me the king of short shorts himself. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask, what shorts are you recommending for everyone for this summer?
Shorts are very important to me. It was a very hard one because I have my favorites. I have a lovely denim cutoff from Prada, which is my all-time favorite. The brown ones that I'm wearing from Jack & Jack, Australia. But I want to pick something new, something that you can go to a store and buy it. And this has been my latest short purchase. It's from Bodhi, from your lovely New York. They just opened a store in Paris as well. And I was in love with the white shorts, the Bodhi field shorts in white. There are other colors. I know white can be difficult to wear, especially in the summer when you live in a grimy city, but it doesn't matter. It looks nice, especially if you have a tan. And I love the cut of this short in particular. They were inspired by the 80s rugby teams in New Zealand. So very short inseams and a wide leg. I think it looks super sexy, as Charlotte Cardin would say.
Fernando Augusto Pacheco with Anita Riota there. You can find our special summer paper, Mediterraneo, on newsstands now or order your copy on monocle.com. And for more summer gems from your favourite Monocle voices, do tune in to The Briefing every Friday at midday London time. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Tom Webb. Our researcher was Henry King and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, have a great weekend, and thanks for listening.